The year is 454 CE, and if you were standing in the throne room in Ravenna, you'd be feeling this tension. It's so thick you could cut it with the sword on the hip of the Emperor Valentinian III.
Right. And this one moment, it's so often overlooked, but it's really the pivot point. It's where the Western Roman Empire decides, pretty definitively, to just cut off its own last chance at survival.
It really is. It's the culmination of, what, decades of this completely dysfunctional relationship?
Exactly. It's all rooted in political reality. I mean, Valentinian III has been the emperor for 30 years since he was just 6 years old.
30 years on the throne.
But the real power, the person actually holding the state together and stopping it from dissolving into, a dozen barbarian kingdoms, that's his general, Flavius Aetius.
Aetius is this larger-than-life character, right? The dominant military figure, the political heavyweight. But even he is starting to face some serious internal resistance.
Well, yeah. He's the man who turned back Attila the Hun just 3 years earlier at the Catalonian Plains, which basically saved Gaul.
A huge victory.
But that victory had a cost. The fact that the Huns then turned around and rampaged through Italy itself, even threatening Rome, that gave Aetius a massive a black eye at court.
So the Senate, the emperor, they all felt vulnerable. And they started to resent the very man who was supposed to be their shield.
And Aetius, maybe he senses this, maybe he feels his position is a bit fragile. So he makes this one last fatal political calculation.
This is in 454.
Yes. He decides to cement his family's position once and for all. He arranges for his own son to be engaged to Valentinian III's daughter, Eudocia.
And that's not just a political alliance, that's a clear signal.
It's an unmistakable signal.
Yeah.
Aetius is saying his bloodline is going to inherit the throne. He's trying to start a new dynasty.
Which, for Valentinian III, who's now 36, this is just unbearable.
He spent his entire life, 30 years on the throne, living completely in Aetius' shadow.
And it's worse than just a shadow. I mean, under his watch, the empire has been bleeding territory.
Oh, massively. If you look at a map from this time, Hispania and most of Gaul are basically gone. They belong to the Suevi and the Visigoths.
And, crucially, North Africa.
North Africa, the empire's grain basket, gone. Seized by the Vandal king Gaiseric. And that isn't just a political loss, it's an economic catastrophe. The empire is bankrupt and starving.
And shamed. You mentioned the Hunnic invasion. When Attila's forces stormed into Italy, where was the emperor?
He was cowering in his capital, Ravenna.
Exactly. And who actually steps up to meet Attila and persuade him to turn back? It wasn't the head of state. It was the Bishop of Rome, Pope Leo the Great.
And that single event proved to everyone, Roman and barbarian alike, that the spiritual authority of the church was now more powerful than the military authority of the emperor. Valentinian's power was basically zero.
His misery was absolute, which made him, completely ripe for manipulation.
And that's where the Roman senator, Petronius Maximus, comes in. He sees this perfect opportunity to seize power for himself, but first, he needs to get Aetius out of the way.
The history here suggests Maximus goes straight to the emperor, this miserable, paranoid emperor, and just whispers in his ear.
He uses the simplest form of fear, right? He says something like, unless you quickly slay Aetius, you will be slain by him. It's pure weaponized paranoia.
And it works. Which brings us to that final dramatic scene in Ravenna. Aetius comes to court to discuss a totally routine matter.
Yeah, he's presenting a list of difficulties with tax collection. Just the tedious financial details that keep an empire running, or in this case, failing to run.
So he's standing there, completely absorbed in his presentation, totally unarmed and exposed.
But then the emperor just snaps Valentinian, this man who's been a puppet his whole life. Yeah. He leaps up from his throne.
Not to talk about tax report.
No. He starts screaming about treachery, about rebellion. He draws his sword and swings it right at Aetius.
The greatest general of the age, the man who defeated Attila the Hun, dies instantly, bleeding out on the throne room floor, right in front of all the stunned courtiers.
The irony is just crushing. Aetius, the supposed barbarian sympathizer, the general the army was loyal to, he doesn't die in battle. He dies in an act of petty court intrigue by the Roman emperor himself.
And Valentinian, in that moment, he thinks he's finally claimed his power. He turns to a nearby officer and asks, smugly, was not the death of Aetius well accomplished?
He's expecting applause, right? Confirmation.
But the officer's response is maybe the most iconic line of this whole era, because he gets it. He understands the real structural problem.
He says, whether well or not, I do not know, but I do know that you have cut off your right hand with your left.
You've just amputated your own defense. This isn't just a clever quote. It's the key insight. Valentinian thought he was seizing control, but he just destroyed the one thing, the one general who commanded the army's loyalty that kept the state functional.
He'd ensure that nobody, absolutely nobody, could hold the Western Empire together anymore. The whole structure depended on that right arm, and now it was gone.
And the system just couldn't handle that kind of self-inflicted wound. The empire now enters this, 7-year cycle of death and plunder that starts just weeks later in 455.
The payback was incredibly swift. Petronius Maximus, the man who whispered murder in the emperor's ear, he realizes he can't have this impulsive, dangerous man on the throne.
He needs to be removed.
Right. So Maximus uses his connections and recruits two of Aetius's old army buddies, men who are burning for revenge, to assassinate Valentinian III.
And they catch him while he's just practicing archery in the Campus Martius, out in the open. It just shows you how little security the emperor had left.
They strike him down, and the story goes they literally steal the crown off his head and run directly to Petronius Maximus.
Who instantly declares himself the new emperor. So we've had 3 rulers in a matter of weeks. The pace of collapse is just dizzying.
But Maximus, now that he has the crown, he inherits the immediate crisis that Aetius had always managed, the Vandals.
King Gaiseric in North Africa. He sees the chaos in Rome, general murdered, emperor murdered, and he sees a golden opportunity. He starts mobilizing his fleet.
Maximus knows he's vulnerable, so he tries this desperate diplomatic move. He sends Avitus, a respected retired official from Gaul, off to Toulouse to try and forge an alliance with the Visigoth king Theoderic II.
He's hoping to buy some protection.
But diplomacy takes time, and it takes credibility, and Rome had neither. Avitus hadn't even come back yet before Gaiseric and his Vandal forces landed their ships on the coast of southern Italy.
And the news of that landing hits Rome like a shockwave. The city just erupts in mass panic and riots.
The people knew exactly what was coming. They had no general, no emperor, no defense. So Petronius Maximus, the great schemer, he tries to cut and run.
He tries to flee the chaos that he himself created.
And here's this fantastic piece of irony. As Maximus is riding away from the city walls, he gets hit and killed, not by a Vandal warrior, but by a rock thrown by a common Roman rioter.
An ignoble, anonymous death after just weeks as emperor.
So now Maximus is dead. Rome is without an emperor, without a general, without any authority at all. The gates are basically left open.
And 3 days later, April 22nd, 455, the Vandals just pour in.
What follows is the sack of Rome. But it wasn't just chaos, it was a measured, cold-blooded affair. Gaiseric's forces roved through the city for 14 whole days.
And this is where we get the verb to vandalize, right? To ruin something without purpose.
Exactly. But the research shows that the Vandals' purpose was actually highly calculated.
Yeah.
Gaiseric didn't want the city. He wanted its wealth.
It was organized looting.
A completely organized campaign of wealth extraction.
Yeah.
They methodically stole all the gold and silver they could find. The chroniclers even say they tore the gold plating off the roof of the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus. This wasn't mindless destruction. It was a focused financial operation.
Pope Leo the Great tried to intervene again, and he did. He successfully negotiated with Gaiseric to prevent the city from being burned and to stop any large-scale massacres.
He was, again, the only figure with enough moral authority to mitigate the disaster.
But even he couldn't stop Gaiseric from taking the real political prize.
No. Gaiseric seized Valentinian III's widow, Eudoxia, and his 2 teenage daughters. He sailed back to Carthage with ships just loaded with treasure. I mean, one ship, heavy with stolen statues, actually sank in the Mediterranean.
And to top it all off, Gaiseric married his son, Honoric, to the older daughter, Eudocia.
The very same girl Aetius had wanted for his own son just a year earlier. It shows you the Western Empire was now just a personal asset pool for barbarian kings to fight over.
The political chaos after the sack, it just sets the stage for the next, even more cynical phase. The rule of the kingmakers.
Right, because while Rome was being plundered, Avitus, the diplomat Maximus had sent to Gaul, was still in Toulouse.
So when the news arrives, assassinations, the sack, total collapse of authority, Theoderic II, the Visigoth king, he convinces Avitus to declare himself emperor.
And he provides Visigoth forces to back him up.
Yeah.
So Avitus is essentially a protectorate emperor installed by the Goths. He marches into Rome as the 4th emperor in just over a year.
And he arrives to find a city that's not just robbed and wrecked, but starving. Acute famine.
He runs into a huge logistical problem right away. He has to send his Visigothic allies away because there's no food for them, but first, he has to pay them.
And the treasury is empty. The Vandals took everything. So Avitus does something that just completely infuriates the Roman people.
He authorizes the stripping of all the remaining bronze from public buildings. Statues, monuments, anything they could melt down to pay the Goths.
That's the ultimate insult, isn't it? The city is defeated and starving, and their new emperor is literally defacing their history to pay off a foreign army.
Avitus's reign collapsed in less than a year. And this is where we meet the defining figure for the next decade of decay.
Ricimer.
Ricimer. He was Avitus's Magister Militum, the master of soldiers, half German, a skilled commander who had served under Aetius.
And while Avitus was busy melting down Roman heritage, Ricimer was out there successfully driving back Vandal raids along the coast. That made him hugely popular, just as Avitus's popularity was hitting rock bottom. So in 456, Avitus sees which way the wind is blowing. He flees Rome, heading back to his estates in Gaul.
But Ricimer intercepts him, captures him, and forces him to become a bishop. It was kind of honorable but permanent political exile.
But even that wasn't enough.
No, Ricimer kept him under guard, and a few months later, Avitus died of unknown causes. We can probably guess what that means. Ricimer ensured the problem was permanently solved.
So Ricimer is now the most powerful man in the West. He controls the army, he's disposed of an emperor, but he can't take the throne himself.
Right, because of that old hypocritical suspicion of barbarian blood. Even though he was the only functional leader left, the Roman Senate would never accept a German emperor.
It's the core paradox of the whole period. The only men who could defend the empire were the ones the system refused to legitimize.
So Ricimer establishes the new political template for the rest of the Western Empire's existence. He'll be the kingmaker, operating behind the scenes, and he'll appoint a series of purely Roman figureheads. The emperor becomes a useful puppet.
And the first of these puppets is Majorian, installed in 457. Ricimer uses him as the public face, which is convenient because it means any failure can be blamed on the emperor.
Majorian, though, turned out to be more ambitious than Ricimer expected. He understood that the West's only chance for survival was to retake North Africa,
The breadbasket, and the source of Vandal power.
So in 460, he launches this truly massive invasion. He assembles a fleet of 300 ships on the coast of Hispania, preparing to cross the strait and march on Carthage.
For the first time in a long time, the people of Italy were actually hopeful. A real Roman victory led by a real Roman emperor.
But it ended in absolute catastrophe. The chronicler Aetius reports that the fleet was seized right off the shore by Vandals who had been given information by traitors.
Sabotage, that raises huge questions, right? Who were the traitors? Was it the Visigoths, or was it someone closer to home?
It could very well have been someone connected to Ricimer himself. Think about it. If Majorian had successfully reconquered North Africa, he would have gained immense prestige and power. Ricimer would have become irrelevant.
It's highly probable Ricimer was either involved or at least let it happen to keep his emperor in check.
So Majorian has to march back to Italy in total disgrace. And we know how Ricimer deals with failed emperors.
He was waylaid by Ricimer's men in the foothills of the Apennines and beheaded.
Ricimer then picks his next face, Livius Severus. And the sources are almost completely silent about him.
He was that inconsequential.
So inconsequential that no one seems to have recorded much of anything he did. He was just a placeholder for 4 years, keeping the seat warm.
And when Severus died in 465, Ricimer didn't even bother to appoint a replacement right away. He just left the throne vacant for 18 months.
And that interregnum, that period with no emperor, is so significant it just exposed the whole institution for what it was.
A myth, a useful fiction.
Exactly. The absence of a ruler showed that the real power was with the army and the Germanic kingmaker. The emperor was just there to help the Romans pretend their collapsing realm still had some connection to its glorious past.
But even Ricimer needed the fiction to continue. By 466, the political landscape shifts again. The Visigoth king, Euric, becomes extremely aggressive, expanding his power in Gaul.
So Ricimer realizes he needs a legitimate emperor to lead the fight. In 467, he appoints Anthemius, a Roman general with a crucial link to the East. He was married to the Eastern Emperor's daughter.
This was a move to get military and financial aid from Constantinople.
And Anthemius, knowing exactly how dangerous Ricimer was, insisted on securing his own position. He demanded that Ricimer marry his daughter, Olympia.
A political marriage to try and create some stability. We even have a report from the poet Sidonius Apollinaris about the wedding. He describes this huge, noisy gathering.
And he notes that the bride still delays to start for her husband's house. You can just feel the tension in that line. Olympia was clearly not thrilled.
I mean, Ricimer was a soldier in his 60s, 15 years older than her own father. This was a cynical political merger, and everyone knew it.
But despite the friction, they prepared for the critical war against Euric. They found an ally in Rheodamus, a Briton who had settled 12,000 men in Brittany.
The plan was to unite their forces and strike the Visigoths in Gaul.
But the alliance failed instantly. Euric was too fast. Jordanes reports that he descended on the Britons with an innumerable army and routed Rhodimus's troops before they could even join the main Roman army.
So the whole defensive plan just collapsed.
And with that military failure, Anthemius started to fall apart. In 470, he got sick, and instead of seeking, rational counsel, he decided it was black magic.
Wait, sorcery. After decades of brutal, cynical politics, the emperor's solution is a witch hunt.
That's the final stage of institutional decay, isn't it? He started executing men for unproven sorcery. And for Ricimer, this is the final straw.
Ricimer's in Milan, just watching his puppet descend into madness.
So he recalls 6,000 soldiers, marches on Rome, defeats Anthemius, and has him executed in 472.
And then, just 2 months after killing his own father-in-law, the great kingmaker Ricimer is struck down by a fever and dies in Rome.
His death creates this power vacuum that just accelerates the final decline. Without its puppet master, the Western Empire has 4 emperors in 4 years. None of them hold any real power.
And that chaos allows a new barbarian soldier to step forward, Orestes. And he's a fascinating figure, isn't he? He perfectly illustrates how intertwined these two worlds have become.
He was Roman-born, but he'd spent years serving at the court of Attila the Hun. He was actually the Roman ambassador sent from Attila to Constantinople way back in 449. He knew both sides better than anyone.
So Orestes rallies the Germanic mercenaries who made up the bulk of the army, marches on Ravenna, and the current emperor, Julius Nepos, just flees without a fight.
Orestes now has all the power. But, like Ricimer, he refuses to take the throne himself. He still honors the fiction.
So he appoints his 10-year-old son, Romulus, to the imperial throne. Romulus's mother was Roman, so he was technically less barbarian than his father.
The court accepted this farce for a single year. Romulus was immediately given the mocking nickname Augustulus, Little Augustus, the child emperor of a dying land.
And the final end comes in 476, and it's over something as simple as pay. Orestes had promised his Germanic mercenaries land in Italy for their service.
Their leader, Odovacer, a German and a Christian general, demanded he make good on that promise, and Orestes refused.
That was the crucial mistake. The army's loyalty was to the man who would give them what they wanted, land rights in Italy. Their loyalty instantly transferred to Odovacer.
The mercenaries marched. Orestes met them at Placentia, was quickly defeated, and Orestes was killed in the fighting. The last functional Roman general of the West was gone.
Odovacer then moves into Ravenna, captures little Romulus, and instead of killing him, he does something pretty merciful. He just sends the boy into retirement with a pension.
The imperial line ends not with a bang, but with a quiet fade to obscurity.
And this is where history tells us the Western Empire formally ended. The historian Jordanes wrote that the Western Empire, which began with Augustus, perished at this point, and that from this time onward, kings of the Goths held Rome and Italy.
Odovacer's rise was the final honest admission that the long effort to make barbarians Roman was over. He just took the title, King of Italy, separating himself completely from the defunct imperial past. His blood no longer mattered. Only his ability to govern did.
The entire Western apparatus had collapsed, but the world didn't end. And to understand what happened next, we really have to look east to Constantinople and the calculations they were making.
Absolutely. The Eastern Empire was more stable, but it wasn't immune to this kind of turmoil. In 457, the Emperor Marcian died, ending the Theodosian dynasty.
So who would rule? Again, the army had the biggest say. The commanding general was a man named Aspar, but just like Ricimer, he was of barbarian descent, an Alan, and the Eastern court would not accept him on the throne.
So Aspar does his own king-making. He picks his household steward, Leo the Thracian, to be his figurehead.
But Leo proved impossible to manipulate. He realized he needed his own counterforce to Aspar's influence, so he looked to the Isaurians, a warlike mountain people from Asia Minor.
They were perfect. They had the necessary martial skills, but they had been part of the empire for centuries, so they were considered undisputably Roman.
And to seal this new alliance, Leo marries his daughter Ariadne to the Isaurian leader Zeno. With the Isaurians behind him, Leo felt secure enough to have Aspar executed in 471, a brutal, decisive move.
When Leo died a few years later, his 6-year-old grandson, Leo II, Zeno's son, was crowned. The child died quickly, leaving Zeno, the Isaurian warrior, as emperor.
This caused some temporary chaos. Zeno was briefly driven out by a rival, Basiliscus. who then made himself deeply unpopular with heavy taxes.
So Zeno marched back, the people welcomed him, and Basiliscus fled to a church for sanctuary.
And Zeno showed his cunning. He lured Basiliscus out by promising not to shed his blood. And technically he didn't. He just had him locked in a dry cistern and starved him to death.
Pragmatic cruelty. So by 476, Zeno is firmly in power, and he's watching the West disintegrate. And Odovacer, having just deposed Romulus Augustulus, shrewdly messages him.
He offers a deal, right? He'll acknowledge Zeno as the ultimate overlord if Zeno will recognize him as the rightful ruler of Italy.
And Zeno accepts. He grants Odovacer the title of patrician, a high Roman rank, but pointedly not king. This created a brief titular reunification of the Roman Empire under Zeno, a huge diplomatic win for Constantinople.
But, as you said, it was in name only. Odovacer immediately started acting like an independent king, conquering Sicily, making his own treaties. By 488, Zeno was getting worried about Odovacer's ambition.
And Zeno had another problem closer to home, Theoderic the Ostrogoth. He was leading this massive, hungry coalition that was pressing towards Constantinople.
Zeno tried to appease him with titles, land, cash. None of it worked. The Goths needed a permanent home.
So Zeno, the ultimate calculator, decides to solve both his problems with one elegant solution. He offers to recognize Theoderic as king of Italy if he'll just march west and get rid of Odovacer.
And Theoderic jumps at the chance. He heads west with up to 100,000 people, Goths, Huns, discontented Romans, all looking for a country. The fate of Italy was now in the hands of the Ostrogoths.
Which brings us to the new Gothic kingdom in Italy under Theoderic the Great.
And that invasion was swift. Odovacer tried to resist, but Theoderic destroyed his army with great slaughter near Verona.
Odovacer holed up in well-defended Ravenna, and the siege dragged on for 3 years. Odovacer could resupply the city by sea, which frustrated Theoderic.
So they reached a compromise, a treaty making them co-rulers of Italy.
A compromise that lasted 2 years. In 493, Theoderic ended the joint rule by murdering Odovacer with his own hands at a banquet.
Chilling. He supposedly hewed him in two and boasted that Odovacer had no backbone.
The message was clear. Theoderic was a decisive king, not a soft politician. And unlike Odovacer, he had no interest in paying lip service to Constantinople. He was Theoderic the Great, king of Italy.
And one of his first acts was to completely redefine Roman citizenship. He declared that only the Romans who had actively supported his takeover could still claim the rights of citizenship.
This was the final inversion. Loyalty to a functional Gothic king was now more valuable than Roman bloodline. The old system was dead.
Under Theodoric, the prestige of Rome itself just faded. He preferred Ravenna. He only visited Rome once, in 500 CE.
He set up a segregated system. Romans held civil offices, but high military posts were reserved for Goths. It created stability while he was alive, but the cultural friction was intense.
And that friction really came to a head after he died in 526, especially around education.
Exactly. His heir was a 10-year-old boy, Athalaric, and his mother, Amalasuntha, served as regent. She wanted to give him a proper Roman education, rhetoric, literature, philosophy.
But the Ostrogoth nobles hated that idea. They feared a Roman education would make the boy a sissy. They argued that letters are far removed from manliness and that teachers instill timidity, not daring.
They equated Roman learning with the weakness and decadence of the last emperors. They claimed Theoderic himself said that if boys feared the teacher's strap, they would never have the courage to face a sword or spear.
It's a brutal distinction. They're explicitly saying that Roman education leads to cowardice. They wanted a ruler trained in arms, not rhetoric.
And this profound disillusionment with Rome's educational and political system is what leads to the emergence of a completely new social order. If a Roman education was useless, and politics just led to bloodshed, young noblemen started looking for new paths.
And one of those young men was Benedict of Nursia. Son of a Roman nobleman, he went to Rome to study, but just became disgusted with the noise and licentiousness of the city. His studies seemed pointless, so he just left.
According to Pope Gregory the Great, he dedicated himself to the life of a hermit in a cave near Subiaco, seeking an order and moral rigor that the city could no longer provide.
His reputation for holiness spread, and monks from a nearby monastery asked him to be their abbot. He agreed and immediately tried to impose a life that was strict, regulated, quiet, and productive.
The existing monks, who were used to a much easier life, tried to poison his wine.
So he returned to his cave.
He did. But around 529, he led his followers up a mountain near Cassino, burned the ruins of an old temple of Apollo, and built a new monastery, Monte Cassino, in its place.
A literal displacement of the old pagan world with the new Christian order.
And this is where he developed the rule of Saint Benedict, which became the law of a new kind of kingdom, one completely removed from the political struggle.
He listed the duties of its tenants: relieve the poor, clothe the naked, visit the sick, and fundamentally prefer nothing to the love of Christ.
And the rules for community life were designed to be rigorous and orderly. Silence was preferred, monks slept clothed, ready for service, the abbot's decisions were final.
And perhaps most radically, he outlawed personal wealth. The vice of personal ownership was to be cut out by the very root. Monks owned nothing.
It was a direct antidote to the self-serving materialism of the Roman elite. And the other key pillar was labor. Every monk had to spend hours a day in manual labor, alongside their studies.
So Benedict was, in a way, presented as the ruler Italy lacked. A figure devoted to a higher calling, providing a law that was the same for all, enforced with absolute justice.
The Benedictine way of life offered unity, discipline, and a secure identity in a world where political and cultural identity had completely dissolved.
In the monastery, learning and virtue, which led nowhere in the decadent city, yielded great reward because they existed within a disciplined system. The search for order, defeated in the political realm, succeeded only in the spiritual one.
It's a powerful reflection, isn't it? The Western Empire was lost not just because of military invasion, but because of the moral and administrative failure of its own leaders. That failure drove people to seek order and purpose in entirely new structures.
They found survival either under a foreign king who proved competent, like Theoderic, or under a spiritual ruler who provided definitive, enduring law, like Benedict.
When the central pillar of the state fails that spectacularly, people will always find a new, more dependable structure to organize their lives around. Whether that's a Gothic king who promises land and defense, or retreating into the organized piety of a monastery, where the laws of God finally replace the useless laws of men.
Oh, and by the way, if you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs.